Marcus opened his eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling. Rough wooden beams crossed above him, darkened by years of smoke from a fireplace he could hear crackling somewhere close. His head throbbed with a dull ache that spread down his neck and into his shoulders. He tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Every muscle felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry in the cold. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was the storm. That terrible, violent storm that had come out of nowhere while he was driving the herd across the valley. The sky had turned black in minutes, and the wind had hit like a physical force. His horse had reared and thrown him. After that, nothing but darkness and the sensation of cold rain pelting his face. A door creaked open somewhere to his left. Marcus turned his head slowly, fighting against the stiffness in his neck. A woman walked in carrying a wooden bowl. Steam rose from it in lazy spirals, carrying the rich smell of beef broth and vegetables. She was probably in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her clothes were plain, practical, the kind worn by someone who worked the land for a living. But it was her face that caught his attention. There was something about the set of her jaw, the way her eyes assessed him without fear or hesitation. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was steady, neither warm nor cold. Just factual. "Good. I was starting to wonder if you'd hit your head harder than I thought." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The woman seemed to anticipate this. She set the bowl down on a small table beside the bed and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. She handed it to him without ceremony. He drank gratefully, the cool water soothing his parched throat. "Where am I?" he managed to ask. "My ranch," she replied. "About 15 miles north of where you went down. I found you yesterday evening, half drowned in a gully. Your horse ran off, but he came back to my property. That's how I knew someone was out there." Yesterday evening. Marcus felt a jolt of alarm. "My herd. Where's my herd?" "In my east pasture," the woman said calmly. "All 47 head, fed and watered. They wandered onto my land during the storm. Took me most of the night to round them up properly, but they're safe." Marcus stared at her. 47 head. She'd counted them. She'd not only found them in the middle of a storm but had brought them in and cared for them. That was hours of work, hard work, in terrible conditions. For a stranger's cattle. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. The woman picked up the bowl of soup and held it out to him. "Start by eating this. You need your strength back. We can talk about everything else later." Marcus took the bowl. His hands shook slightly, whether from weakness or emotion he wasn't sure. The soup was perfect, exactly what his battered body needed. As he ate, he watched the woman move around the small room, checking the fire, straightening a blanket that had fallen from a chair. Her movements were efficient, practiced. This was someone who knew how to handle emergencies, who didn't panic when things went wrong. "What's your name?" he asked between spoonfuls. The woman paused, her back to him. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she turned, and something flickered across her face. Recognition? Regret? It was gone too quickly for him to identify. "Sarah," she said. Sarah Chen. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but the way she said it made him feel like it should. Like there was something important he was missing, some connection he should be making but couldn't quite grasp. He finished his soup in silence, aware that the woman was watching him with those steady, assessing eyes. Outside, he could hear the wind still blowing, though not with the fury of the storm. Somewhere beyond these walls, his herd was safe because of this stranger's kindness and skill. But as Marcus handed back the empty bowl and thanked her again, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Chen was not quite the stranger she appeared to be. The second day brought clarity and confusion in equal measure. Marcus felt stronger when he woke, strong enough to sit up without his head spinning. Sarah had left fresh clothes folded on the chair beside his bed, men's clothes that fit him almost perfectly. They were worn but clean, and he wondered briefly whose they had been before deciding he didn't have the right to ask. He dressed slowly and made his way out of the small bedroom. The house was larger than he'd expected, a solid ranch home built by someone who understood this land. The main room held a stone fireplace, a heavy wooden table, and chairs that had been made by hand. Everything was clean and ordered, but there was a loneliness to the space. No photographs on the walls. No small personal touches that made a house a home. It felt like a place where someone lived but didn't quite belong. Sarah was outside. Marcus found her in the barn, forking hay into the feeding troughs. She worked with the kind of rhythm that came from doing the same task 1,000 times before. When she noticed him, she didn't stop working. "You should be resting," she said. "I've rested enough," Marcus replied. "Let me help." You had a concussion. You need at least another day before you should be doing any heavy work. Marcus picked up a spare pitchfork anyway. I'm not good at sitting still. Sarah gave him a long look, then shrugged. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rustling of hay and the soft noises of the cattle outside. Marcus found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. There was something familiar about the way she moved, the angle of her profile when she turned her head. It nagged at him like a word on the tip of his tongue. How long have you been running this place alone? He asked. Sarah's hands paused for just a moment. 3 years. That's hard work for one person. I manage. I can see that. Those cattle of mine weren't easy to round up. You'd need to know what you're doing to handle them in a storm like that. I grew up around cattle, Sarah said. She drove the pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. It's not exactly a rare skill in this part of the country. Marcus sensed he'd touched on something sensitive, so he changed topics. The clothes you left me. They fit well. They were my husband's, Sarah said flatly. He's been gone 2 years now. Truck accident on the highway. I'm sorry. So am I. They finished with the hay and moved on to checking the water troughs. As they walked between the pastures, Marcus got a better look at Sarah's operation. She ran a tight ship. The fences were in good repair, the buildings well maintained. This was someone who took pride in their work, who understood that on a ranch, small problems became big ones if you didn't stay on top of them. His cattle were in the east pasture, just as she'd said. They looked calm and content, already settling into the routine of this new place. Marcus leaned against the fence and counted heads. All 47, exactly as Sarah had reported. You know your way around livestock, he said. Where'd you learn? Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. My father had a ranch. Bigger than this one. I spent every summer there growing up, learning the work. He used to say that knowing cattle was like knowing people. You had to understand what they needed before they knew to ask for it. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. Your father. What was his name? Sarah's jaw tightened. Why do you ask? Just curious. You talk about him like he was a good teacher. He was the best, Sarah said. Then, almost reluctantly, she added, his name was Richard Lawson. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Richard Lawson. He knew that name. Everyone in the cattle business within 300 miles knew that name. Richard Lawson had been a legend, a man who'd built one of the most successful ranching operations in the state through sheer determination and skill. He'd also been Marcus's mentor, the man who taught him everything he knew about running a herd. Marcus had worked for Richard Lawson 20 years ago, when he was barely out of his teens and didn't know a fence post from a gate latch. Richard had taken him in, taught him the business, treated him like the son he'd always wanted. But Richard had a daughter, Marcus remembered. A little girl who'd visited the ranch a few times during those summers. What had her name been? He looked at Sarah with new eyes, seeing past the years and the hard living. The shape of her face. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. Dear God. Sarah Lawson, he whispered. You're Richard's daughter. You're little Sarah who used to follow me around asking questions about the horses. Sarah didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the cattle, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the fence rail. That was a long time ago, she said. Different people. Different lives. Marcus couldn't stop staring at her. The little girl he remembered had been all energy and curiosity, with wild dark hair always escaping from her braids and scraped knees from climbing things her father told her not to climb. She'd been maybe 7 or 8 years old, and she'd shadowed Marcus everywhere during those summer visits, peppering him with questions about everything from why cows chewed their cud to how to tell if a fence line needed reinforcing. He'd been kind to her because she was the boss's daughter, but also because there was something earnest about her interest. She really wanted to learn. Richard had been proud of that. Marcus remembered him saying that Sarah had a natural instinct for the work, that she understood animals in a way most people never would. And now here she was, 30 years later, running her own ranch and saving his life without saying a word about who she was. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus asked. Sarah finally looked at him. Her eyes were hard. What difference would it have made? You needed help. I gave it. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Your father meant everything to me. I worked for him for 3 years. He taught me everything I know about this business. I remember, Sarah said quietly. You were the one who stayed. After my mother died, when Dad needed the help most. You stayed when the other hands left. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Margaret Lawson's death had been sudden, a heart attack that took her in her sleep. Richard had been devastated. The ranch had suffered. Half the crew had quit within a month, not wanting to work for a grieving man who could barely get out of bed in the morning. But Marcus had stayed, picking up the slack, keeping things running until Richard found his footing again. "Your father gave me my start," Marcus said. "I owed him everything." "And yet you left too," Sarah said. There was no accusation in her voice, just a statement of fact. 2 years later, you were gone. Started your own operation down south. "Your father encouraged me to go," Marcus protested. "He said I was ready. He said I had to build something of my own or I'd always be working for someone else." "I know what he said. I also know that after you left, he was never quite the same. You were like a son to him, Marcus. When you left, it broke something in him." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Marcus had always told himself that leaving had been the right choice, that Richard had understood his need to strike out on his own. But hearing Sarah's perspective, seeing the pain that still lingered in her eyes after all these years, made him question everything. "I didn't know," he said helplessly. "He never said anything. In the letters we exchanged, he always sounded happy for me." "That's because he was a good man who wanted the best for you," Sarah said. "But good men can be hurt too. They're just better at hiding it." They stood in silence for a long moment. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the weight of history pressing down on the two humans watching them. "What happened to the ranch?" Marcus asked. "Your father's ranch. I heard it was sold about 10 years ago, but I never learned the details." Sarah's expression grew distant. "Dad got sick. Cancer. He fought it for 2 years, but in the end, it won. I was living in Seattle by then, working in finance. I came back for the funeral and found out that the medical bills had eaten through most of his savings. The ranch was mortgaged to the hilt. There was no way to keep it." "I wish I'd known," Marcus said. "I would have helped. I would have done something." "Like what?" "You had your own operation to run, your own family to take care of. Life moves on, Marcus. People move on." But the bitterness in her voice suggested that she, at least, had found moving on harder than she wanted to admit. "Is that why you came back out here?" Marcus asked. "Bought this place?" Sarah nodded slowly. "After my husband died, I couldn't stay in the city anymore. Too many memories, too much noise. I needed space. I needed land. I needed to get my hands dirty and remember what it felt like to do real work. So I sold everything we had, bought this property, and started over." "By yourself?" "By myself," she confirmed. "It's smaller than Dad's place was. Harder to make ends meet. But it's mine. Nobody can take it from me." Marcus heard the steel in her voice and understood. Sarah had lost too much. Her mother, her father, her husband, the family ranch. This place, this hardscrabble operation that she ran alone, was her line in the sand. It was where she'd decided to make her stand against a world that had taken everything else from her. And she'd still found the time and the heart to save a stranger and his cattle in the middle of a storm. Even when that stranger turned out to be someone from a past that clearly still caused her pain. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, knowing the words were inadequate. "For all of it. For leaving when I did. For not staying in better touch with your father. For not being there when he needed help." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Some of the hardness left her eyes, replaced by something that might have been understanding or might just have been exhaustion. "You made the choice you had to make," she said. "Just like I'm making the choices I have to make now. We can't go back and change the past, Marcus. All we can do is deal with what's in front of us." She was right, of course. But as Marcus watched her walk back toward the barn, her shoulders set in that familiar stubborn line, he couldn't help but wish that the past could be different. That he could have been there when Richard needed him. That Sarah hadn't had to lose so much. That he'd recognized her sooner and said something that mattered. Marcus stayed another day. He told himself it was because he needed to make sure the cattle were ready for the drive back to his own ranch, but the truth was more complicated. Being here, on this land with Sarah, had awakened something in him. Memories he'd buried under years of hard work and forward momentum were suddenly demanding attention. He spent the morning helping Sarah fix a section of fence that had come loose during the storm. They worked side by side, digging post holes and stretching wire, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Marcus found himself remembering the summer days at Richard's ranch, the way the old man had taught him to do this exact work. Your father had a saying about fence posts, Marcus said as he tamped dirt around a new post. Something about how you could tell a man's character by how deep he set his posts. Sarah smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Anyone can build a fence that looks good on the surface. But a man who sets his posts deep is thinking about the next generation. He's building something that will last. That's it exactly, Marcus said. I must have dug 1,000 post holes under his supervision. Every single one, he'd measure the depth. If it wasn't at least 3 feet, he'd make me dig it deeper. He was like that about everything, Sarah said. Her voice had softened. He used to tell me that there were no shortcuts in ranching. You either did things right or you didn't do them at all. They worked in silence for a while, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less guarded. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs as they worked. Marcus found himself stealing glances at Sarah, seeing flashes of the little girl she'd been in the determined set of her jaw, the precise way she measured and cut the fence wire. I need to ask you something, Sarah said suddenly. And I need you to be honest with me. Marcus set down his tools. All right. That last summer you worked for my father. The one before you left. Something happened between you two. I was too young to understand it then, but I remember the tension. I remember Dad being upset. What was it? Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd hoped this conversation wouldn't come up, but he should have known better. Sarah had always been perceptive, even as a child. Your father wanted me to marry, Marcus said slowly. There was a woman in town, the daughter of another rancher. Your father thought it would be a good match. A good way to merge operations, build something bigger. But you didn't want to marry her. I didn't love her, Marcus said. I barely knew her. Your father, he came from a different generation. He believed in practical partnerships. But I wanted more than that. I wanted what he had with your mother. That real connection. Sarah's expression was unreadable. So you left. So I left, Marcus confirmed. I told your father I appreciated everything he'd done for me, but I had to live my own life. Make my own choices. He said he understood, but there was something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or hurt that I was rejecting his advice. He never told me that story, Sarah said quietly. I don't imagine he would have. Your father wasn't the kind of man who talked about his feelings much. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, he certainly wasn't. After Mom died, he closed up even more. It was like living with a ghost. He went through the motions, did the work, but the life had gone out of him. Marcus heard the pain in her voice and felt his own guilt deepen. I should have stayed in better touch. Should have visited more. I got so caught up in building my own place, starting my own family, that I let the years slip away. We all did that, Sarah said. I was just as guilty. I went to college, got that job in Seattle, convinced myself I was too busy to come home more than once or twice a year. I told myself that Dad was fine, that he had the ranch and that was all he needed. But he was lonely, Marcus. So lonely. And I wasn't there for him either. The fence was done, stretching straight and strong between its posts. They stood back and surveyed their work. It was good work, the kind that would last. The kind Richard Lawson would have approved of. Did you ever marry? Sarah asked. Have that real connection you were looking for? Marcus nodded. Her name was Elena. We had 30 good years together before she passed. Cancer, like your father. We had 2 children, both grown now with families of their own. I'm glad, Sarah said, and she sounded like she meant it. I'm glad you found what you were looking for. And you? You mentioned your husband died 2 years ago. James, Sarah said. He was a good man. Patient. Kind. He understood when I needed to come back out here, even though it meant leaving everything we'd built in the city. He was going to help me run this place. We had plans. Her voice broke slightly. We had so many plans. Marcus reached out and squeezed her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it seemed to steady her. They walked back toward the house together, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pastures. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner. Marcus tried to help, but she shooed him out of the kitchen, telling him that some things a woman needed to do herself. He sat at the table and watched her move around the space, seeing echoes of her father in every efficient motion. Over plates of roast chicken and vegetables from Sarah's garden, they talked about the years between. Marcus told her about his children, about the challenges of building his operation from nothing, about the pride he'd felt when he finally had something to show for all the lessons Richard had taught him. Sarah talked about her life in Seattle, about meeting James at a coffee shop where they'd both reached for the same newspaper, about the strange adjustment of coming back to ranch life after so long away. "It's harder than I remembered," she admitted. "Or maybe I'm just older and it feels harder. There are days when I wonder if I made the right choice coming back here." "But you stay," Marcus observed. "But I stay," she agreed. "Because this is where I belong. This land, this work. It's in my blood, just like it was in Dad's. Just like it's in yours." Marcus couldn't argue with that. They cleared the dishes together, and as the sun set outside the kitchen window, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Marcus realized something important. He'd spent 20 years trying to prove that leaving Richard Lawson's ranch had been the right decision. That he'd needed to strike out on his own, build his own legacy. And maybe that had been true. But he'd also lost something in the leaving. A connection to a man who'd been like a father to him. A chance to be there when it mattered. Looking at Sarah now, seeing the woman she'd become and the losses she'd endured alone, Marcus understood that some debts couldn't be repaid. Some mistakes couldn't be fixed. But maybe, just maybe, some connections could be rebuilt. The morning Marcus was supposed to leave, he woke before dawn to the sound of Sarah moving around the kitchen. He dressed quickly and found her making coffee, the rich smell filling the small house. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much. "You don't have to see me off," Marcus said. "I know you've got your own work to do." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you before you go. About a proposition." Marcus raised his eyebrows but didn't interrupt. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "This ranch," she said, gesturing around them, "it's more work than one person can handle. I've been managing, but barely. Last winter I lost 3 head to a cold snap because I couldn't get to them in time. During spring calving, I was running on 2 hours of sleep a night for weeks. And when something breaks, really breaks, I have to hire help from town at rates I can barely afford." "You need a partner," Marcus said. "I need help," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. A partner would own part of this place, and I'm not ready for that. But I could use someone who knows the work. Someone I can trust." Marcus felt his heart rate pick up. "What are you suggesting? You said you have 2 grown children. Are they interested in ranching?" "My daughter is a lawyer in Denver. My son teaches high school in Albuquerque. They visit a few times a year, but neither one wants to take over the operation." Sarah nodded like she'd expected this answer. "So what's your plan? Work until you can't anymore and then sell?" Marcus had been avoiding thinking about that question for years. "I suppose so. I'm 62, Sarah. I'm not old, but I'm not young either. Some mornings my back reminds me of every fence I've ever built." "Then here's what I propose," Sarah said. "We combine our operations. Not a merger, not a partnership. More like a cooperation. We share resources, share labor during the busy seasons. My land connects to yours if you follow the creek east for about 10 miles. We could move herds between properties as needed, spell each other during calving season, pool our resources for supplies." Marcus thought about it. His ranch was about 3 times the size of Sarah's, with about 200 head of cattle compared to her 50. He had 3 full-time hands working for him, but they were getting older too, and good help was hard to find. The idea of having someone like Sarah, someone who understood the work and had the skill to do it right, was tempting. "What would you want in return?" he asked. "Nothing but the same courtesy. Help when I need it. Someone to call when things go wrong. And maybe," she paused, looking down at her coffee, "maybe a chance to rebuild something that was lost. My father thought the world of you, Marcus. I was angry about that for a long time. Angry that you got his approval and his teaching while I was shuffled off to the city to visit my mother's family every summer. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired of doing this alone." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about ranching. This was Sarah extending an olive branch, offering to turn a painful past into something constructive. "I'd need to think about the logistics," he said. "Talk to my hands, make sure they're comfortable with the arrangement." "Of course," Sarah said. "This isn't a decision to make in 5 minutes. Take your time. Talk it over. But Marcus, I'm serious about this. I think we could build something good here. Something my father would have been proud of." They spent the next hour talking through the practical details. Water rights, grazing rotation, equipment sharing, emergency protocols. The more they talked, the more excited Marcus became. This could work. This could really work. When it was time to leave, Marcus loaded his gear into his truck while Sarah brought the cattle down from the east pasture. 4 to 7 head, all healthy and calm. She'd done more than just keep them safe. She'd cared for them like they were her own. "I'll call you in a few days," Marcus said as he climbed into his truck. "After I've had time to talk to my crew and work out the details." "I'll be here," Sarah said. "I'm always here." Marcus started the engine but didn't pull away immediately. "Sarah, I want you to know something. Your father would be proud of you. What you've built here, what you've survived. He'd be so damn proud." Sarah's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As Marcus drove away, his cattle trailing behind, he watched Sarah in his rearview mirror. She stood by the fence, one hand raised in farewell, the morning sun lighting her from behind. She looked strong standing there. Capable. Exactly like her father had looked all those years ago. Over the next week, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's proposal. He talked it over with his hands, and to his surprise, they were enthusiastic. They all knew Sarah's ranch, had seen her at the livestock auctions, respected her reputation for running a clean operation. One of his men, an older cowboy named Ray, said something that stuck with Marcus. "Boss, I've been working ranches for 40 years, and I can tell you that the ones who make it aren't the biggest or the richest. They're the ones who know when to ask for help and who to trust when things get hard. If Sarah Chen is offering to work with us, we'd be fools to say no." Marcus made the call on a Thursday evening. Sarah answered on the second ring. "I talked to my crew," he said. "They're in. Hell, they're more than in. They're excited." He could hear the smile in Sarah's voice. "So are we doing this?" "We're doing this. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "We build it right. Deep posts, strong fences, the kind of operation that will last. The kind your father would have approved of." "Deal," Sarah said. "When can you come back out? We should walk the property line together, figure out where we need to make improvements." "How about this weekend?" "This weekend works." They spent the next 6 months transforming their separate operations into something unified. It wasn't easy. There were disagreements about grazing rotation and arguments about equipment purchases. But they worked through each problem the way Richard had taught them, with patience and respect and a commitment to doing things right. By spring, they had a system that functioned like a well-oiled machine. During calving season, Marcus's crew spelled Sarah's operation, giving her actual sleep for the first time in years. When one of Marcus's hands retired, Sarah recommended a young woman from town who turned out to be a natural with horses. They negotiated a bulk discount on feed by combining their orders, saving both operations significant money. But more than the practical benefits, something else was growing. A friendship built on shared history and mutual respect. Marcus found himself driving to Sarah's ranch even when there wasn't a specific reason, just to check in or share a cup of coffee. Sarah started showing up at Marcus's place with fresh bread from her oven or to help repair a fence that didn't really need 2 people to fix it. One evening, as they sat on Sarah's porch watching the sunset paint the sky, Sarah said, "You know what the best part of this is?" "What's that?" "I don't feel alone anymore. For the first time since James died, since Dad died, since everything fell apart, I don't feel like I'm carrying all of this by myself." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. He'd been carrying his own weight for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to share the burden. "Your father used to say that ranching wasn't about the cattle or the land," Marcus said. "It was about the people. The connections you build. The trust you earn." I didn't really understand what he meant back then, but I think I'm starting to now. Sarah looked at him, her expression soft in the fading light. "He'd be happy, you know. That we found our way back to each other. That we're building something together." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "I think he would be." As night fell and the stars came out one by one, Marcus thought about all the years that had passed. The choices he'd made. The roads not taken. He couldn't change the past or bring back the people they'd lost. But he could be here now, in this moment, building something that mattered with someone who understood what that meant. Sarah stood and stretched. "Come on, old man. Let's check on those new calves one more time before we call it a night." "I'm not that old," Marcus protested, but he stood too, following her down the porch steps. They walked through the darkness together, their footsteps in sync, heading toward the barn where new life waited to be checked on and cared for. It was simple work, the kind they'd both been doing their whole lives. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like coming home to something that had been missing for a very long time. And as they worked side by side in the warm glow of the barn lights, Marcus finally understood what his mentor had been trying to teach him all those years ago. It wasn't about building the biggest operation or having the most cattle. It was about this. Two people, working together, caring for what mattered, building something that would last long after they were gone. Deep posts. Strong fences. Connections that endured. That was what made a legacy worth leaving behind.